If you had told me when I was 18 years old, standing in my father's kitchen in a plain gray dress with my hands shaking, that I would still be alive to tell this story at 78, I would not have believed you. I did not think I would survive that year, let alone 5 more decades after it. But here I am, an old woman now, sitting in a rocking chair that my own son built for me, and I am finally ready to tell you everything. My father made me marry my cousin when I was 18 years old. Not asked. Made. And before I tell you how that happened and what it did to my life, I want to ask you for something small. If this story moves you even a little, please hit that like button before you go any further, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what I share next, because I have many more stories like this one. And I would love it so much if you left a comment down below and told me where in the world you are watching this from. I read every single one, and it warms this old heart of mine to know how far these words travel. Now, let me take you back. Let me take you back to a world with no electricity, no cars, no television. A world where the sun told you what time it was, and the seasons told you what to do next. Let me take you back to the year I turned 18, and the day my father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me who I was going to marry. I was born in the autumn, in a farmhouse with no doctor present, only my grandmother and a midwife from 3 farms over. My mother told me later that I came into the world during the corn harvest, and that my father was so busy in the fields that he did not come inside to see me until the sun went down. That was simply how things were. The farm did not wait for babies. I was the 4th of what would eventually be 9 children, 5 girls and 4 boys, and I grew up the way most Amish children grew up in those days, which is to say I grew up working. By the time I was 5 years old, I was gathering eggs. By the time I was 7, I was helping my mother with the wash, hauling water, stirring the big black kettle over the fire. By 10, I could bake bread that did not fall flat, and by 12, I was helping can vegetables for the winter. Rows and rows of jars lined up in the cellar like little soldiers waiting for the cold months. My father was a stern man. I want to be fair to him, because he has been gone a long time now, and there is no use speaking cruelly of the dead. He was not a man who beat us, not a man who screamed, but he was a man whose word was law in our house, and there was never a question, not once in my childhood, of disobeying him. He believed, truly believed, that his authority over us came from God himself, and that to question him was to question the order of the world. My mother deferred to him in everything. I never once saw her argue with him in front of us children, though I sometimes heard low voices through the wall at night, voices that stopped the moment a floorboard creaked. I had 4 sisters and 4 brothers, and I want to tell you a little about them, because they shaped me as much as anything else in those years. My oldest sister, Sarah, was already nearly grown by the time I have my earliest memories, and she seemed to me as a small child, almost like a second mother. Always the one who braided my hair before church. Always the one who knew how to calm a crying baby when our mother's hands were full elsewhere. My older brother, Daniel, was the one who taught me to milk a cow when I was barely tall enough to reach the udder, standing behind me with his hands over mine until I learned the rhythm of it myself. Below me came 3 more sisters and 2 more brothers, spaced out over the better part of 20 years, so that by the time our mother had her 9th and final child, I was already old enough to help raise him nearly as much as she was. Our days followed the sun. We rose before it, in the dark, with the smell of the wood stove already filling the kitchen by the time I came downstairs, my mother having been awake for an hour or more already, coaxing the fire back to life, setting water to boil. Breakfast was simple and filling. Oatmeal or fried mush most mornings. Eggs when the hens were laying well. Always more food than seemed reasonable for a family our size, because there was always more work ahead of us than a light breakfast could sustain. After breakfast came chores, and chores did not end until well after dark, broken only by the meals in between, and on Sundays, by church, which took up the better part of the day in its own right. First the long service itself, and then the fellowship meal afterward, and often visiting between families that stretched into the evening. I attended the one-room schoolhouse until I was 14, which was typical for our community. Learning reading, writing, and arithmetic alongside German and scripture, taught by a young Amish woman who herself had only finished school a handful of years before she began teaching the rest of us. I was not a poor student, though I do not think anyone would have called me gifted either. What I remember most about those school years was not the lessons themselves, but the walk there and back, nearly 2 miles each way, which I made with my siblings and cousins, our small group growing and shrinking as we passed different farm lanes, picking up one cousin here, dropping off a sibling there, until by the time I reached our own gate in the evening, I was often walking alone, listening to the sound of my own boots on the dirt road, thinking whatever thoughts a young girl thinks when the world around her seems both very small and very certain. We lived in a small church district, tucked into farmland that rolled out for miles in every direction, dotted with the white farmhouses and red barns of families we had known for generations. Everyone in our community was connected somehow, if you traced the lines back far enough. That was simply the nature of these old settlements. The families who had come over generations before had married within a small circle, and that circle had stayed small for a long, long time. I did not think much about this as a child. It was just the water I swam in. My best friend growing up was also my second cousin. The boy who sat 2 benches over from me at the one-room schoolhouse was my father's sister's grandson. We were all tangled together like the roots of an old oak tree, and nobody thought it strange, because it was the only tree any of us had ever known. My cousin, the boy I would eventually marry, was named Amos. He was my father's brother's son, which made him my first cousin, and he was 2 years older than me. I want you to understand something before I go further. I did not grow up hating Amos. That is not the story I am telling you. I grew up around Amos the way you grow up around a brother. Our families visited often, sometimes every other Sunday, sometimes more during harvest when the men would help each other bring in the crops. Amos and I played together as small children. We caught frogs together in the creek behind his father's barn. We got in trouble together for sneaking pie off the windowsill where it was cooling. He was, in my memory of those early years, simply a cousin. A playmate, a friend, in the loose way that children are friends with whoever is put in front of them. As we got older, into our early teenage years, the way boys and girls in our community are kept somewhat separate began to apply to us as well. We still saw each other at gatherings, at church, at weddings and funerals and barn raisings, but there was less of the easy playing and more of the careful distance that our community expected between young men and young women who were coming of age. I noticed, around the time I was 15, that Amos's father and my father had begun spending an unusual amount of time together after church, standing off to the side with their hats in their hands, talking in low voices while the rest of us loaded up the buggies. I did not think anything of it at the time. Men talked. Men always had business to discuss, whether it was the price of grain or whose fence needed mending. I had no idea that they were discussing me, discussing my future, discussing, in fact, my life. I should explain something about our particular community, because not every Amish settlement operates the same way, and I do not want you to think that what happened to me happens to every Amish girl, because it does not. Most Amish young people, in most communities, choose their own spouses. They go through what is called Rumspringa, a period of running around where young people are given more freedom before they choose to be baptized into the church, and during that time they court and choose partners, much like young people anywhere else do, within the bounds of their faith. This is the story that most people know, if they know anything about the Amish at all. But my father's community was older, stricter, more insular than many others. It had been founded by a small number of families who had broken away from a larger settlement generations before, over disagreements about how closely they should adhere to the old ways, and in the process of trying to preserve what they believed was the purest form of the faith. They had also preserved some of the oldest customs, including a stronger role for parents in arranging marriages, especially when a family's land, or a family's name, or a family's standing in the community was involved. I think it is worth pausing here to explain a little more about how courtship usually worked in Amish communities, even the stricter ones, because I do not want you to walk away from this story believing that every Amish marriage is arranged the way mine was. In most districts, even quite conservative ones, young people meet at what are called singings, gatherings held on Sunday evenings after church, where the young unmarried members of a district and its neighboring districts come together to sing hymns and, more importantly, to spend time with one another under the loose supervision of the adults. It is at these singings that most Amish courtships begin, a young man offering to drive a young woman home in his buggy after the singing has ended, a custom that, once accepted, signals to the whole community that the two are courting. From there, courtships in most districts proceed with a fair amount of privacy and a fair amount of choice on both sides, sometimes lasting a year or more before an engagement is even announced, which traditionally happens only a few weeks before the wedding itself, kept quiet until the very end in a custom some communities still hold on to even now. My community held singings too, and I attended them as a young teenager. Though by the time I was old enough to seriously court anyone, my fate had already been decided behind closed doors by two brothers who had never once asked me who I might have chosen for myself at one of those Sunday evening gatherings. I have wondered, over the years, whether there was a boy at those singings I might have chosen, had I been given the chance, whether there was some other version of my life waiting on the other side of a decision that was never mine to make. I do not let myself wonder about it for long. There is no use, at 78 years old, in mourning a road never traveled. But I want you to understand that what happened to me was not simply the ordinary Amish way of doing things, even within a faith that many outsiders assume operates the same everywhere. It was the product of a particular community, at a particular time, with particular pressures around land and lineage, and I do not want any of you to walk away from my story believing this is how every Amish girl comes to be married, because for most, it is not. My father, I would learn much later, was not simply a farmer. He held a position of respect within our church district, not quite a minister, but close to one. A man whose opinion carried weight when decisions were made about the community. And Amos's father, my uncle, held land that bordered ours, 120 acres of some of the richest soil in the county, land that had been in our family for 3 generations. I did not understand the economics of it as a young girl. I did not understand that marriages in a farming community are sometimes not only about 2 young people, but about land, about consolidating what has been divided, about keeping wealth and inheritance within a bloodline rather than scattering it out to strangers. I did not understand, until I was much older, that my marriage to Amos was in some very real way a business arrangement between two brothers who wanted to keep their land and their family's future tightly bound together. I found out on a Tuesday evening in early spring when I was 18 years old. I remember the date because it was 2 days after my birthday, and my mother had made a special supper, chicken and dumplings, my favorite, though I did not think much of the timing until later. After the meal, after my younger siblings had been sent outside to finish the evening chores, my father asked me to stay at the table. My mother stayed too, standing near the stove, her hands folded in front of her apron, not looking at me directly. My father did not waste words. That was his way. He told me that he and his brother had come to an agreement that it was time for me to marry, and that I would marry my cousin Amos before the end of the summer. He said it the way a man might announce that the barn needed a new roof, or that the cows would be moved to a different pasture. There was no question in his voice. There was no space, in the way he said it, for me to respond with anything but acceptance. I sat very still. I remember the feeling in my chest, a kind of falling, like the floor had opened beneath my chair, even though I had not moved an inch. I looked at my mother, hoping, I think, that she would say something, that she would soften it somehow. But she kept her eyes on the stove, and I understood in that moment that she already knew, that she had known for some time, and that she was not going to help me. I asked my father, in a voice that came out smaller than I wanted it to, why? Why Amos? Why now? Why at all? When I had never once been asked whether I wanted to marry anyone, let alone my own cousin. My father's answer has stayed with me for 60 years. He said that a woman does not need to understand every decision made for her, only to trust that it is made with her well-being in mind, and the well-being of the family, and the well-being of the church. He said that Amos was a good, hard-working young man, that our families were well matched, that the land would stay together, and that I should be grateful, because many young women in our history had been given far less consideration than I was being given now. In the days after that supper, I tried, quietly and carefully, to understand what had led to this decision, because my father had not given me much explanation beyond what he considered necessary. I overheard, a few days later, my mother speaking to her own sister, my aunt, in the kitchen while they were shelling peas, and I stood just outside the doorway longer than I should have, listening. My mother said that my father and my uncle had been discussing the matter for nearly a year, that there had been some concern after my uncle's oldest son had shown interest in leaving the community during his Rumspringa, about whether the family land might eventually pass into hands that did not share the same commitment to the old ways. Amos, as the second son, was seen as more likely to stay, more likely to be steady, and marrying him to a young woman from a family already known for its devotion to the church, a family like mine, was seen by both fathers as a way of ensuring the land, and the name and the faith all stayed bound together for another generation. My aunt asked my mother, in a voice so quiet I nearly missed it, whether she thought it was fair to me. My mother did not answer for a long moment, and when she finally did, all she said was that fairness was not always the measure by which these things were decided, that duty came first, and that I was a good girl who would understand that duty in time. I remember standing in that hallway feeling something harden inside me, some small, private part of myself that decided, right then, that I would never fully agree with that answer, even if I never found the courage to say so aloud. I want to be honest with you, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering at my age. I did not scream. I did not run from the table. I did not, as you might see in an English movie, throw myself against my father's chest and beg him to reconsider. That was not a world I had ever been taught existed. I had been raised from birth to believe that my father's authority was not just his own, but God's authority working through him, and to resist it was not simply disobedience to a man. It was disobedience to the order of the universe as I understood it. So I sat at that table, and I said nothing more, and eventually I asked to be excused. And I went out to the barn, where I sat in the hayloft until it was fully dark, and I cried until I did not have any more tears left in me that night. I did not sleep much in the weeks that followed. I want you to understand what 18 felt like for me. In that world, at that time, I had never been more than 30 miles from the farm I was born on. I had never worn a dress that was not gray, brown, or blue. I had never spoken to a boy without at least one adult somewhere in the room. And now I was being told that within a few months, I would be married to my father's brother's son, a boy I had grown up beside. A boy who felt to me less like a future husband and more like a brother I had simply never called by that name. I want to tell you about Amish and how he felt about all of this, because I think it is important, and because for many years I was angry with him too, before I understood that he had very little more say in the matter than I did. Amos was 19 when our fathers made their arrangement. He came to see me once, about a week after I found out, riding over on the family's horse and cart, and he found me hanging wash on the line behind the house. He did not dismount right away. He sat there for a long moment, watching me, and I remember thinking that he looked almost as pale and unsettled as I felt. He told me that his father had informed him the same way mine had informed me, as a decision already made, not a question to be discussed. He told me that he did not know what to say to me, that he did not know how a person was supposed to feel about marrying someone who had once helped him build forts out of hay bales. I remember he twisted his hat in his hands the whole time he spoke, the way his father did when he was uncomfortable, and I remember thinking, even in the middle of my own fear and grief, that he was frightened too. Not in the same way I was frightened, because he was not the one being asked to leave his home and his name behind and become part of another household, the way a bride was expected to in some respects, but frightened all the same, of disappointing his father, of a life that had been decided for him before he'd had the chance to imagine any other. We did not fall in love in those weeks before the wedding. I want to be clear about that, because I know some of you watching may be hoping this story turns into some kind of romance, the kind where two people are pushed together against their will and slowly discover that they were meant for each other all along. That is not what happened, not at first, and I think it is important that I tell you the truth rather than the pretty version. What happened in those weeks was that two frightened young people who had grown up as cousins tried, clumsily and quietly, to find some kind of peace with the fact that their lives had been decided for them, and that the only thing left within their control was how they treated each other once it was done. The wedding took place in November, which is traditional in many Amish communities, after the harvest was in, and there was time for the work of preparing a wedding, the cooking, the cleaning, the gathering of family from other districts. I will not pretend to you that I remember every detail of that day, the way a bride in love might. I remember it in fragments, the way you remember a fever. I remember my mother helping me dress that morning, her hands surprisingly gentle as she pinned my hair beneath my cap. And I remember, just once, catching her eyes in a small hand mirror propped against the dresser, and seeing something there that I had never seen from her before. Something that might have been sorrow, or might have been recognition, as though she were remembering her own wedding day, and finding it looked very much like mine. The ceremony itself was long, as Amish weddings often are. Several hours of preaching and scripture before the vows themselves were even spoken. I sat on a bench across from Amos, both of us in our wedding clothes, him in a new black coat, me in a blue dress my mother and aunts had sewn together over several weeks. I do not remember much of what the bishop said. I remember the weight of every eye in that room on the two of us, cousins who everyone in that community had watched grow up side by side, now being bound together as husband and wife. I remember thinking, in the strange, detached way you think things during moments too large to fully feel, that I was watching this happen to someone else. That the girl in the blue dress could not possibly be me. The wedding day itself began, as most things in our community did, before sunrise, with the women of both families already at work in the kitchen by the time I woke. My aunts and older cousins had been cooking for 2 days already, preparing what felt like enough food to feed the entire county: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes by the enormous bowlful creamed celery, which was a tradition at weddings in our community, and which to this day I cannot smell without being carried straight back to that morning. All manner of pies and cakes lined up on the counters and windowsills of my parents' house. More sugar and butter in that kitchen than I had seen gathered in one place in my whole life. Guests began arriving by mid-morning. Family from 3 different church districts, some having traveled the better part of a day by buggy to be there, filling the yard with the sound of horses and wheels on gravel, children running between the legs of adults. The whole world, it seemed, converging on our small farm to witness the joining of 2 families that had, in truth, already been joined for generations. I remember standing near the window of my parents' bedroom that morning, watching the yard fill with buggies, and feeling a strange sense of unreality, as though I were watching a wedding that belonged to someone else, some other young woman whose life I happened to be borrowing for the day. My sisters helped me finish dressing, fussing over the pins in my hair, telling me how lovely I looked, and I remember trying very hard to smile in a way that would satisfy them, so that none of them would ask the question I was afraid they might ask, which was whether I was truly happy, because I did not know, that morning, what honest answer I could have given them. After the ceremony, there was the meal, the traditional foods, the long tables set up in the barn that had been cleared and cleaned for the occasion, the singing that went on late into the evening. People congratulated us. People told us what a fine match we made, how sensible it was, how the land would stay in the family now, how blessed we were. I smiled, because that was what was expected of me, and I said thank you. And I do not think a single person in that barn that night could have told you that the bride sitting at the head table did not want to be there at all. That first winter of our marriage, Amos and I moved into a small house that had been built on a corner of his father's land, close enough to both families that we could still help with chores on both farms, far enough that we had, for the first time, a space that was only ours. I remember the first night in that house with a clarity that surprises me even now, 60 years later. I remember how cold it was, how the wind came through the gaps around the windows, how Amos built up the fire without being asked, and then sat across the small room from me, not saying anything, giving me space in a way I had not expected. He asked me, that night, if I wanted him to sleep in the barn, so that I could have some time before anything else was expected of a marriage. I remember being so surprised by the offer that I did not know how to answer him at first. I told him no, that we were married now, and that I understood what that meant. But I think that offer, small as it was, told me something about the kind of man my cousin was going to try to be, even inside a situation neither of us had chosen. I will not go into great detail about the private parts of a marriage, because that is not the story I came here to tell you. But I will say that our early months together were awkward, careful, full of two people trying to learn how to be kind to each other inside a life that had been built around them rather than by them. There were nights I cried quietly after Amos had fallen asleep, missing my mother's kitchen, missing the sound of my younger siblings running through the house, grieving the girl I had been before that Tuesday evening supper changed everything. There were nights Amos sat up late at the small table, and I would find him there in the morning, having fallen asleep with his head on his arms, and I would wonder what worries kept a 19-year-old boy from his bed. I remember one morning in particular, only a few weeks into our marriage, when I burned an entire pan of biscuits so badly that smoke filled the little kitchen and set both of us coughing and laughing despite ourselves. The first real laugh we had shared since our wedding day. Amos opened the door and the window to clear the smoke, and instead of scolding me, the way I half expected any husband to do, he simply sat back down at the table and said that his mother had burned her share of biscuits too in her first year of marriage, and that if I promised not to tell her he'd said so, he would eat whatever I put in front of him and be grateful for it. I remember that small kindness more clearly in some ways than I remember the wedding itself, because it was the first moment I began to suspect that whatever else was true about how we had come together, Amos was not going to be a cruel man or an impatient one. And that realization alone lifted a weight from my shoulders that I had been carrying since that Tuesday evening supper months before. There was another moment, that same winter, when I fell ill with a fever that kept me in bed for the better part of a week. Amos took over the cooking without complaint, burning far more than I ever had, and sat by my bed each evening reading to me from the German Bible we kept on the shelf. Not because either of us was especially devout in that quiet moment, but because it was the only book in the house, and he wanted, I think, simply to be near me, to do something useful with his hands and his voice while I was too weak to do much more than listen. I remember thinking, feverish and half asleep, that I could have done far worse in a life I had not chosen than to end up cared for by a boy I had once caught frogs with in his father's creek. But something happened over that first year, something I did not expect and could not have predicted. Amos and I began to talk. Not just the necessary talk of running a household and working land, though there was plenty of that, but real talk, the kind that happens between two people slowly learning each other's minds. He told me about his fears of taking over his father's farm one day, of whether he would be a good enough farmer, a good enough head of a household. I told him about my dreams, small as they were in that world, of having a garden that was truly my own, of learning to quilt patterns that had been passed down through my mother's side of the family, rather than his. We discovered, somewhere in that first hard winter, that we actually liked each other. Not the way the community assumed a husband and wife should like each other, but in the quieter way that old friends like each other. The way people who have known each other's whole lives can find comfort in each other, even when nothing about their situation is what they would have chosen. I do not want to paint this as a fairy tale, because it was not one. There were hard years ahead of us, years I will tell you about, years of loss and grief and doubt that tested whatever fragile understanding Amos and I had built between us. But I want you to know that by the end of that first year, I no longer woke up each morning with the same dread I had felt in the weeks before our wedding. I had not chosen this life, but I had begun, slowly, to build something inside of it that felt like it might, someday, be able to hold weight. Before I continue, I want to remind you, if this story is touching something in you, Please take a moment to like this video. And if you have not already, subscribe so you will be here for the rest of what I have to share, because there is much more to tell. And please, leave a comment and let me know where you are joining me from tonight. It means more to this old woman than you know, to picture all the different corners of the world where someone might be listening to my story. Our first child was born a little less than 2 years after our wedding. A daughter we named Miriam, after Amos's grandmother. I remember holding her for the first time and feeling something shift inside of me. A kind of love I had not experienced before. Fierce and immediate. The kind of love that made the difficulties of my own beginning with Amos feel smaller, at least for a while. Amos was a gentle father from the very first day. I remember watching him hold Miriam in his rough, work-worn hands, so careful, so afraid of being too rough with something so small, and I remember thinking that whatever else was true about how our marriage had begun, this man was going to be good to our children. Amos and I settled into our small house that first spring properly, planting our own garden together for the first time, arguing gently over where the beans should go versus the squash, learning each other's small habits, the way he liked his coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, the way I liked the windows open even in the cold because I could not stand a stuffy room. Those small domestic discoveries, silly as they sound, were their own kind of courtship, I think now. A courtship that happened backward, after the wedding instead of before it. But a courtship all the same, 2 people learning the shape of a life they would share, piece by piece, season by season. The years that followed fell into the rhythm that most Amish farm families know well. We had 4 more children after Miriam, 2 more girls and 2 boys, spread out over the following 12 years. Our days were full from before sunrise until well after sunset, filled with the endless work of a farm and a growing family, the planting and harvesting, the canning and preserving, the mending and washing, the schooling of the children in the same one-room schoolhouse where I had once sat as a girl myself. There was little time, in those years, for me to sit and reflect on the strangeness of my situation, on the fact that the man I shared a bed with, the father of my children, was also my first cousin, a fact that our community treated as unremarkable but that I know. To many of you watching this video must sound very strange indeed. I want to address that directly, because I know it is likely the reason many of you clicked on this video in the first place. Cousin marriage was not unusual in the old insular Amish communities of that time, particularly in smaller, more isolated church districts like the one I grew up in, where the pool of available marriage partners within the faith was small, and where families sometimes arranged unions to keep land and resources within the family line, much as certain royal families in Europe did for centuries, and much as isolated communities all over the world have done throughout human history when their populations were small and tightly knit. It was not seen in our community as strange or wrong. It was simply practical, given the circumstances of our lives. I do not say this to defend the practice, because I have complicated feelings about it that I will share with you before this story is over, but I want you to understand the world I lived in, rather than judging it only by the standards of the world you live in now. I want to tell you a little more about those years of raising our children, because they were, despite everything that had come before, some of the fullest and happiest years of my life. Miriam was a serious child from the very start, always watching, always asking questions that sometimes made the adults around her uncomfortable, wanting to know why the sky was blue or why we could not have electricity like the English families we sometimes saw from the road. Questions I answered as best I could, even when my own answers felt thin. Our second child, a daughter named Ruth, was the opposite in temperament, easy and laughing. The kind of child who could make even the dullest chore feel like a game, and I remember her trailing behind me in the garden from the time she could walk, pulling up weeds alongside real vegetables with equal enthusiasm, so that I had to check behind her before I could tell what damage her small, helpful hands had actually done. Amos took to fatherhood in a way that surprised some of the older men in our community, who were used to a more distant, authoritative style of raising children, the kind of fatherhood his own father had shown him, and mine had shown me. He got down on the floor with our children when they were small. He let them ride on his shoulders out to the fields, even when it slowed his work considerably. He was patient in a way I do not think either of us had expected he would be, given how quiet and burdened he had seemed in those first frightened weeks of our marriage. And I remember thinking, watching him teach our oldest son to whittle a small wooden horse one long winter evening, that whatever grief and confusion had marked the beginning of our life together, our children were growing up in a home built on something gentler than either of us had been given ourselves. There were hardships, of course, in those years. Hardships that had nothing to do with the unusual nature of our marriage, and everything to do with the unforgiving nature of farm life itself. We lost a crop one terrible summer to a drought that seemed like it would never end, watching the corn wither in the fields while we hauled water by hand, bucket by bucket, trying to save what we could. We lost animals to sickness. We lost, hardest of all, a child. Our third-born, a son we named Eli, contracted a fever when he was only 3 years old, and despite everything the community's remedies and the local doctor could do, we buried him on a cold morning in early spring, in the small cemetery behind our church, next to Amos's grandparents and mine. I do not think I have ever, in 60 years, found the words to fully describe what it is to bury your own child. I will not try to give you those words now, except to say that it was in the days and weeks after we lost Eli that I understood, truly understood for the first time, what kind of partnership Amos and I had built, without either of us fully realizing it. He did not tell me to be strong. He did not remind me that it was God's will, and that I should accept it without complaint, though I know many in our community would have expected exactly that kind of stoic acceptance from both of us. Instead, I remember him sitting with me in the barn late one night, both of us unable to sleep, and simply crying together. Two cousins who had been forced into a marriage neither of them chose, grieving a son neither of them could save, and finding, in that terrible shared grief, a closeness that I do not think either of us had expected our arranged marriage could ever produce. I remember, in the days surrounding Eli's burial, the way our whole church district gathered around us, bringing food, taking over our chores without being asked, sitting with us in near silence for hours at a time. Because that was how our community grieved, together, wordlessly, through presence rather than speech. My own mother came and stayed with us for nearly 2 weeks, cooking, cleaning, caring for our other children, so that Amos and I could simply exist inside our grief, without the burden of the farm's endless demands pressing down on us every moment. I remember her holding me one night in the kitchen, the same kitchen where, in a sense, this whole story of mine had begun with my father's announcement so many years before, and I remember thinking, even through my grief, that this was perhaps the closest my mother and I had ever felt to each other. Two women bound by a loss that made every other old grievance between us feel small by comparison. Amos carved a small wooden marker for Eli's grave before the stonecutter could finish the proper one, a little horse, because Eli had loved the horses more than anything else on the farm, always begging to be lifted up onto their backs, even though he was far too small to ride alone. I still have that little wooden horse, It sits on the shelf above my bed to this day, worn smooth now from 60 years of my hands passing over it on nights when I cannot sleep, and I do not think there has been a single year since Eli's death that I have not thought of him at least once during every season, wondering who he might have become. What kind of man might have grown from that small, laughing boy who loved horses more than anything in the world? I share that not to make this story sad, for the sake of being sad, but because I think it was in that grief that I began to understand something important about love. Something I did not have the words for at 18. I had always believed, before my marriage, that love was something you fell into, the way the English world describes it, a sudden lightning strike between two people who choose each other freely. What I learned, over years of hardship and small daily kindnesses, of arguments and forgiveness, of raising children and burying one, was that there is another kind of love, a slower kind, built brick by brick, out of shared burden and shared survival. I did not fall in love with Amos. I built a life with him, one difficult, ordinary day at a time. And somewhere in the building, something that I can only call love took root. Even though it began in a place I never would have chosen for it. I want to tell you now about a period of doubt that came into our marriage in our late 20s. Because I think it is important not to make this story sound too tidy, too resolved. There was a stretch of about 2 years after we lost Eli and before our youngest was born, when Amos and I struggled a great deal. Grief affects people differently, and where I wanted to talk, to sit together and speak of our son, Amos wanted to work, to bury himself in the fields from dawn until dark, coming home too exhausted to do anything but eat in silence and fall asleep. I remember feeling, during that time, more alone than I had felt even in those first frightening weeks before our wedding. I remember wondering, in my darkest moments, whether I had been foolish to believe that what we had built was really love at all, or whether it had simply been two people making the best of a bad situation, mistaking companionship in grief for something deeper. There was a night during that time when I packed a small bag, intending to walk to my mother's house and stay there for a while, to get some distance. To think, Amos found me at the door, and instead of ordering me to stay, the way I think our fathers might have done in a similar situation, he asked me, quietly, what he could do differently. He told me he did not know how to grieve out loud, that he had never been taught how, that watching me cry made him feel like a failure as a husband, because he could not fix the thing that was broken. It was, I think, the most honest conversation we had had since the day he found me hanging wash on the line and told me he did not know what to say about our father's arrangement. We sat on the porch steps that night until the stars came out fully, talking in a way we had never quite managed before. And though it did not solve everything overnight, it was, I believe now, the true turning point of our marriage. It was the moment we stopped simply enduring the life that had been built for us and started, together, choosing to build something of our own within it. Our youngest child, a boy we named Jonas, was born the following spring, and I remember holding him and feeling a kind of hope I had not expected to feel again after losing Eli. Our family settled, in the years that followed, into a rhythm that, while never free of hardship, held far more contentment than I ever could have imagined feeling on that terrible Tuesday evening when I was 18 years old. Amos became a well-respected man in our community, eventually taking on responsibilities within the church, much like his own father and my father before him. I became known, among the women of our district, for my quilting, a skill I had taught myself in those early hard years as a way to keep my hands and my mind occupied through difficult nights. Our life within the church itself deepened over those years as well, in ways that surprised me, given how complicated my feelings toward my faith had become after my wedding. I want to be honest that there were years, in my 20s, when I attended church out of habit and obligation more than genuine conviction, sitting on the hard benches during the long services, turning my father's decision over and over in my mind, wondering how a faith I had been taught to trust completely could have allowed a man to hand his own daughter over like a piece of property without so much as a conversation. But faith, I have found, is rarely a straight line for anyone, even those raised inside a community as devout as ours. Over time, through the births of my children, through Eli's death, and the strange, terrible comfort our community offered us in our grief, through the slow accumulation of small mercies and small kindnesses I witnessed in the people around me, I found my way back to a faith that felt like my own, rather than simply my father's. A faith that held room, I decided, for both deep belief and deep disagreement with the men who claimed to interpret it. I became close, in those years, with several of the older women in our district, women who had, I came to learn, their own complicated stories tucked away behind their calm faces and steady hands. One woman, a widow named Katie who lived 2 farms over, had also been matched to her husband by her parents, though not to a cousin, and she told me once, over a shared afternoon of quilting, that she believed the old practices of arrangement were fading even in our conservative district, that the younger fathers coming up were less inclined to arrange matches the way our own fathers had, in part because so many of the daughters who had been matched in earlier generations had quietly made clear, in the way they raised their own children, that they did not wish the same fate passed down again. I took a strange comfort in that conversation, the idea that even without ever raising my voice against my father directly, my own quiet unhappiness, and the unhappiness of women like Katie, might have been slowly changing the practices of our community. For the generations that came after us, our children grew, went through their own schooling, their own Rumspringer, though our community's version of that freedom was quieter and more limited than in some other settlements. 3 of our 4 surviving children chose to be baptized and remain in the faith. 1. My daughter Miriam, our firstborn, eventually left the community as a young woman, married an English man she met while working at a farm stand along the highway, and moved 2 states away. I want to pause here and tell you about Miriam leaving, because it connects to something important about how my own experience shaped the choices I made as a mother. When Miriam came to me, 19 years old, and told me she did not want to be baptized, that she wanted to leave and build a life outside our community, I felt many things at once. I felt fear for her, fear of the unknown world she was choosing, fear of losing her the way families sometimes lose children who leave the Amish faith, through shunning or estrangement. But underneath that fear, I felt something else. Something I had not expected to feel. I felt a fierce, protective relief that she had a choice at all. I remember sitting with her at our kitchen table, much as I had sat at my own father's kitchen table decades before, and instead of telling her what she must do, I asked her what she wanted, and I listened, really listened to her answer. I remember asking Miriam, that day at the kitchen table, what had first made her start questioning whether she wanted to stay, and she told me about the young man she had met at the farm stand. An English boy who had asked her, of all things, what she wanted out of her life. A question she said she had never once been asked by anyone in our community, not by her teachers, not by the ministers, not even, she admitted carefully, by me or her father. However much we had tried to give her more freedom than I had been given myself. I remember that admission landing hard in my chest, because I had believed all those years that I was doing better by my children than my own parents had done by me, and yet here was my daughter telling me that even our softened version of the old ways had never quite gotten around to asking her the most basic question a parent can ask a child, which is simply what she herself might want. I did not tell my husband right away that I had in effect given our daughter my blessing to leave, though I do not know that I needed to give it, since it was her choice to make regardless of what either of us said. When Amos found out, there was tension between us for the first time in many years, because he worried, as many Amish fathers do, about what her leaving would mean. Not just for her soul as our faith understood it, but for our standing in the community, for the closeness of our family in years to come. But I reminded him, in a conversation I still remember clearly, of a Tuesday evening supper many years before, when neither of us had been given any choice at all about the shape our lives would take. I told him that whatever else we believed about our faith, about our community, about the rightness of the old ways, I did not want our daughter to spend her life wondering what might have been, the way I had spent years of my own life wondering. Amos was quiet for a long time after I said that. Eventually he nodded, and though it took him longer than it took me, he came, in time, to make his peace with Miriam's choice, and to remain close with her even after she left, visiting her when the community's rules allowed it, writing to her, meeting the grandchildren she eventually gave us, even though they were being raised outside the faith. I tell you this part of the story because I think it is important for you to understand that my own experience, being forced into a marriage I did not choose, changed the way I raised my own children, and the way Amos and I, together, slowly began to push back, in small, quiet ways, against some of the rigidity we ourselves had been raised inside of. We did not leave the community. We did not renounce our faith, which remained real and important to both of us, even with its flaws. But we tried, in the ways available to us, to give our children more voice in their own lives than either of us had been given in ours. The rest of our children stayed within the community, married partners of their own choosing, though of course within the faith, and had families of their own. I have grandchildren now, many of them, and even great-grandchildren, some who still live within the Amish faith, and some, through Miriam's line, who do not, and I love every single one of them without reservation, without measuring their worth by whether they chose the same path I was forced onto so many years ago. In our later years, once the children were grown and gone from the house, Amos and I found ourselves alone together in a way we had not been since those first frightened months of our marriage, and I remember being almost nervous about it, wondering whether we would find, in the quiet of an empty house, that we had built our closeness entirely out of the busyness of raising a family, and that without children underfoot, we would discover two strangers sitting across the table from each other. What I found instead surprised me. We talked more in those years than we ever had before. Long, unhurried conversations over coffee in the mornings, over mending in the evenings, conversations about our grandchildren, about the changes we watched creeping slowly even into our conservative community, about the years behind us, and the years we hoped still lay ahead. Amos took up woodworking in earnest in his 60s, filling our small barn with birdhouses and toy horses, and eventually, the rocking chair I still sit in every single day, built with his own hands the winter before his health began to fail, as though some part of him knew he wanted to leave me something solid to hold on to once he was gone. I lost Amos 6 years ago, after 58 years of marriage. I want to tell you about the last years we had together, because I think they say something important about how a forced beginning does not have to determine an entire life. In his final years, as his health began to fail, it was Amos who often spoke, when our children or grandchildren visited, about how grateful he was for the life we had built together. He told our youngest son once, in front of me, that he did not know what kind of man he would have become if he had married someone else, someone he had not first known as a friend, as family, before he ever knew her as a wife. I remember hearing him say that, a strange mixture of emotions, because I knew, better than anyone, how much pain and fear had marked the beginning of our story, and yet I also knew that what he was saying was true. We had not chosen each other. But we had, over 60 years, chosen each other again and again, every single day, in 1,000 small ways that no father's arrangement could have guaranteed or predicted. I sat with him the night he passed, holding his hand, an old woman's hand holding an old man's hand, both of them worn and spotted with age. Both of them having done 60 years of work on the same land, raising the same children, burying the same son, weathering the same doubts and finding their way back to each other again and again. I did not think, in that moment, about the 18-year-old girl who had cried in a hayloft the night her father announced her engagement. I thought only of the man beside me, my husband, my cousin, my oldest friend, and I found that I could not separate my grief for him from a deep and abiding gratitude for the life we had somehow managed to build. I want to be honest with you, before I close this story, about my complicated feelings toward the practice that shaped my life. I do not believe even now that arranged marriage, especially between such close family members, is something I would wish upon any young woman today, including my own granddaughters. And if any of them had come to me and told me their father intended to choose their husband for them the way mine had, I would have stood between that decision and that girl with everything I had left in this old body. I believe young people deserve the right to choose who they build a life with, and I believe that a father's authority, however well-intentioned, should never come at the cost of a daughter's voice in her own future. That is something I believe firmly, and something I hope, if any young woman is watching this video right now, you will take to heart. Whatever your own circumstances may be, nobody, whatever their culture or their faith, should have their life's most important choice made entirely by someone else's hand. And yet, I cannot tell you that my own life was ruined by what happened to me, because it was not. I found, inside a beginning I never chose, a partner who became, through decades of shared hardship and shared joy, the truest friend I have ever known. I do not offer that as an excuse for the practice that brought us together. I offer it only as the truth of my particular life, a truth that is more complicated than either a simple tragedy or a simple fairy tale. My father made a decision that took my choice away from me at 18 years old, and I have spent much of my life since then believing that what he did was wrong, even as I also believe that the man he chose for me became, against every possible odds, exactly the right person for me to have walked through this long life beside. I think often, these days, about my father, and about the conversation we might have had if I had ever found the courage, in all the years before he passed, to tell him plainly how much that Tuesday evening supper had frightened me, how many nights I had cried in that hayloft, how close I had come, in those first terrible weeks, to feeling that my entire life had been taken from me before it had even properly begun. I never did have that conversation with him. It was not the kind of thing our relationship allowed for, even decades later, even after I had grown into a wife and mother and grandmother in my own right. He died believing, I think, that he had done right by me, that his decision had been a gift rather than a wound, And there is a part of me that is glad he was able to believe that, and a part of me that still wishes, even now, that I had found some way to tell him the truth before it was too late for him to hear it. I have made my peace, as much peace as a person can make, with the fact that some questions in a life never get answered, some conversations never get had, and that we are left in the end to carry both our gratitude and our grief for the people who shaped us without ever having the chance to fully reckon with them face to face. I carry gratitude for my father, because I do believe, whatever his failures, that he loved his children in the only language he had been given to express love, a language of duty and provision and decisions made on our behalf. And I carry, still, a quiet grief for the 18-year-old girl who was never asked what she wanted, who had to build her own sense of choice and voice out of the narrow room she was left with, inside a marriage not of her choosing. Both things are true. I have found, in my old age, that most important things in life require holding two truths at once, rather than choosing only one. I am 78 years old now. I have outlived my husband, my parents, my siblings, save for one younger brother who still lives on a farm not far from where I grew up. I have watched the world change in ways that would have seemed like pure fantasy to the young girl who once thought her entire world was 30 miles of farmland and one small church district. My grandchildren, especially Miriam's children, sometimes ask me questions about my life that make me laugh. Questions about whether I have ever used a telephone, whether I know what the internet is. Questions that remind me just how far the distance has grown between the world I was born into and the world my great-grandchildren are being raised in now. I tell them what I can. I tell them about the hayloft where I once cried the night my engagement was announced, about the biscuits I burned in my first weeks of marriage, about the little wooden horse that still sits above my bed, and I watch their faces as they try to imagine a version of the world so different from their own. A world without screens, without engines, without the simple freedom to choose, on their own, who they will spend their lives beside. I hope, when they leave my house after those visits, that they carry with them not just an old woman's stories, but some small measure of gratitude for the choices that are theirs to make. Choices that were never mine at their age, and that I have tried, across 60 years, to make sure were at least available to the generations that came after me. One of my granddaughters, Miriam's youngest, sat with me for the better part of an afternoon last spring, recording some of these very stories on a small device she held in her hand, telling me that she wanted her own children someday to hear my voice, not just second-hand through her retelling, but truly hear it, the way you are hearing it now. I did not fully understand, that afternoon, what she meant to do with those recordings, but I trusted her, the way I have learned, slowly and imperfectly across a long life, to trust the younger generations with the freedoms and the tools that were never given to me. Perhaps this very video is part of what she was imagining that day, my voice reaching further than any woman in my family has ever reached before. Further certainly than the 30 miles of farmland that once made up the whole of my known world. I still live simply, still keep many of the old ways close to my heart, though I have softened, in my old age, some of the rigidity I was raised with. My children and grandchildren visit often, and I spend my days quilting, tending a small garden that is entirely my own, and now, apparently telling my story to strangers on the internet, something that would have utterly baffled the 18-year-old girl sitting in her father's kitchen 60 years ago. If there is a lesson I want you to take from my story, it is not a simple one, because my life has not been simple. It is this: that we do not always get to choose the beginnings we are given. Some of us are handed circumstances by our families, our cultures, our histories, that we never would have chosen for ourselves, and some of those circumstances are unjust, and should be spoken against, and should be changed, so that fewer young people in the future have to walk the road I walked. But even inside an unchosen beginning, there is often still room, more room than we expect, to build something of our own. I did not choose Amos, but across 60 years, I chose him, and he chose me, again and again, in 10,000 small acts of patience and forgiveness and shared labor, until what began as an arrangement between two frightened cousins became, by the end, one of the great loves of my life, however strange that may sound to you. I know some of you watching this video come from cultures of your own, where marriages are still arranged by parents, where the idea of choosing your own spouse freely is either a distant hope or something entirely foreign to the world you grew up in. And I want to say to you especially, if that is your story too, that I see you, and that I understand the particular kind of grief and confusion that can live alongside genuine love and duty toward the family who shaped you. And I know others of you come from places where such a thing is unthinkable, where the very idea of a father choosing your husband would feel like something out of a history book rather than a lived reality. And to you, I hope this story has offered a window into a world that still exists, quietly, in small farming communities, not so very far from wherever you happen to be sitting right now. Whichever kind of viewer you are, I am grateful you have stayed with me this long, because a story like mine only has meaning once it has been heard, once it has been carried out into the world beyond one old woman's rocking chair. I want to say one more thing before I let you go tonight. If there is a young person watching this video who feels in some way that their own future is being decided for them without their voice being heard, whether that is about marriage or education or the shape of the life they are meant to live, I hope my story offers you not an answer, because I do not have answers for anyone else's life, but at least some companionship in the difficulty of it. I hope it offers you permission to grieve the choice that was taken from you, even while you search, patiently and stubbornly, for whatever small freedoms remain within your reach. That is, in the end, what I did, without fully realizing it at the time. I grieved what I had lost, and then, slowly, deliberately, I built what I could out of what remained. And I am telling you, from the vantage point of 78 years, that it is possible to do both of those things at once. To hold your grief and your gratitude in the very same hands. I hope you have found something worth sitting with in this story of mine, whether it confirmed something you already believed about arranged marriage, or challenged it, or simply gave you a window into a world very different from your own. I want to thank you, from the bottom of my old heart, for spending this time with me. If this story touched you even a little, please make sure you have liked this video before you go, and please subscribe to this channel, because I have many more stories from my long life that I am hoping to share with you in the days to come. And please, before you leave me a comment and tell me where in this wide world you are watching from tonight. I may be an old woman who spent most of her life within 30 miles of one small farm, but through you, through all of you watching from wherever you are, I feel for the first time in my long life like my world has finally grown as large as I always secretly hoped it might. Sometimes, in the evenings now, I sit in Amos's rocking chair on the porch, the same porch where he once found me packing a bag to leave, the same porch where we sat until the stars came out and finally learned how to grieve our son together, and I watched the sun go down over land that has belonged to our family for 5 generations now. Land that was, in its own strange way, part of the reason my father made the choice he made for me all those years ago. I do not feel bitterness when I look out over those fields anymore, though I did for many years. I feel, instead, a kind of quiet wonder at how a life can be built from such an unlikely beginning. How something as painful as a father's decision at a kitchen table can, given enough time and enough stubborn effort from the two people forced to live inside it, become the foundation of an entire family, generations of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, who exist now only because two frightened cousins found a way to be kind to each other, one ordinary day at a time, for 60 long years. Thank you for listening to an old woman's story. Until next time, take care of each other, and take care of yourselves.